Welcome back to a year of Final Fantasy. We're still in the month of Valifor and unofficially in the month of the Chocobo, and today we're going to be wrapping up the whole Chocobo series as a whole with some general thoughts on it and talk about the games that I didn't get to discuss last time. There are a ton of games in here that never actually came out to the US or they just got canceled outright, so I did want to give them their due to me trying to chronicle this whole Final Fantasy franchise thing, whatever it happens to be. So these Chocobo games began right after the Final Fantasy came out in 1997, continuing all the way up until about 2012 or so, which was when the last proper Chocobo game came out that we've seen, and as far as I understand it, there hasn't really been a definite cancellation of the series, so perhaps it's just dormant right now. I'm going to tackle these in a sort of bullet point format and give you a little information about them, and if you want to go out and find out more information, you can. So number one, we have Chocobo de Battle or Chocobo Battle, and this was actually worked on as an arcade fighter. The interesting thing about this is that it came before Guys, which would have made it the first Final Fantasy fighting game with Final Fantasy characters in it, and while it originally was going to come out in the arcade, it was probably going to be ported to the PS1, actually something similar to like Final Fantasy Dissidia NT that we're actually seeing now with it being out in the arcades in Japan and then ported to the PS4 later. But sadly, we actually never got to see this game and it was cancelled for whatever reason, though there are some interesting data out there and some cheats talking about the game, like some magazine articles, but beyond that, that's pretty much all there is. The next two games, I'll go ahead and group them together, and those are the Chocobo Dungeon games 1 and 2, which I've talked about quite a bit before at the beginning of this month, and Chocobo Dungeon 1, again, was only released in Japan, and Chocobo Dungeon 2 was released worldwide. Other than that, that's really all I'm going to say about it here. So next up, we have Chocobo World, which again, I already did a video over. Chocobo World was a sort of mini game for the PlayStation Pocket, which we actually never got, and that incorporated it into Final Fantasy VIII, and you got a bunch of like really cool items. You could level up the Chocobo summon and even get an exclusive summon via Moomba. After that, we got Chocobo Racing, which again, I did a fairly long video over, and Chocobo Racing was Square's answer to the kart racing genre craze with a lot of characters and honestly only a few tracks, and I think it just came a little bit too late to really cash in on that kart racing mania that we had at the end of the late 90s. That being said, it's a competent racing game, but honestly that's about it. I really did like it though. Next up, number 5, we have Chocobo Stallion, a game I have actually not talked about before. This game was released in Japan in December of 1999 for the PlayStation, and this is what's been dubbed as part of the Chocobo Collection. Basically, the Chocobo Collection had a few of these Chocobo games in. This particular one had the Chocobo mini games that were inspired from Final Fantasy VII, being the Chocobo Racing from that game. Don't confuse it with the Chocobo Racing that I just talked about. It's weird, but it also contains some recurring characters like Chroma and Sid that we've seen pop up time and time again with these Chocobo games. Number 6 here is also exclusive in Japan with the Chocobo Collection, along with Chocobo Stallion, and we have Dice de Chocobo, which made it to the PlayStation in 1999, and then it was also remade in 2002 and released with the Game Boy Advance under the name Chocobo Rando, which a lot of people have roughly translated to Chocobo Land Game of Dice. You'd think that the game would be like a Mario Party-esque kind of thing, but it's really just a Monopoly game reskinned with Final Fantasy elements. Next up, with number 7, we have Hataraku Chocobo. It was released in 2000, which I've already done its own video on. Essentially, it's a compilation of a bunch of mini games and a life sim. I want to say it's kind of like Harvest Moon or Stardew Valley, and that game actually never made it over here to the US due to us not getting the Wonder Swan or Wonder Swan Color, which was what it originally released for. The production of the quality of the game itself is pretty great. There's some cool anime commercials, but other than that, that's all we've pretty much seen of it in the US. Number 8, in 2002, we have a mobile game known as Doko Demo Chocobo, and that was in line with these early experiments on mobile phone games. Now remember, in 2002, we don't have the smartphones and the iPhone apps and all of that stuff. These are pure like flip phone handheld mobile games, and this particular one is an adventure game where you can collect different items, and then later on you can use those items to kind of decorate your standby screen. I guess today we'd call them the lock screen, but back then they didn't really have a lock screen. So anyway, that's what that game was. And in 2003, this is number 9 on the list, we have the follow-up to that game, Doko Demo Chocobo 2, which was roughly titled as Chocobo Anywhere 2 Escape Ghost Ship, which was just the next iteration of that Doko Demo game. And this one also got a standalone expansion in 2004 as well. I don't know really why that happened. I guess it must have been pretty popular, but it never actually came over to the US. None of these Doko Demo games did. All right, number 10. Next up, we have Choco Mate, another mobile phone game app in 2003. Again, far before iPhones or smartphones of the current day. This acted as a sort of social networking app, and I assume it was to cash in on that MySpace craze, as Facebook hadn't really been widespread yet or even thought of. If this came out in 2003, I'm not quite sure when Facebook came out. I believe that was about a year later or so. In 2004, we have Doko Demo Chocobo 3, which apparently it did so well there had to be 3 games or 3.5 games if you count that standalone expansion for number 2, and that's pretty much all I'm going to say about it. Number 12 here, we have a lull in the Chocobo-based games because the last one came out in 2004, that Doko Demo 3, and here we have at the end of 2006 Chocobo de Mobile, which again was a mobile game and was kind of like a mini game compilation thing for mobile phones. And this was right at the beginning of the iPhone era. I'm not actually sure if it even made it to the iPhone era, as flip phones and all of that were still pretty popular at the time. Number 13, we get a Chocobo full-fledged return to the DS in late 2006 with Final Fantasy Fable Chocobo Tales, which was actually what I did my most recent episode video on. And that's pretty much all I'll say about it here. You can go and click up, I guess, in the corner and see that video if you're curious at all. So for number 14, we have Final Fantasy Fables Chocobo's Dungeon on the Wii, which was already discussed a bit in the Chocobo Dungeon series at the beginning of the month, so you can go back and watch that if you want to know more about it. Number 15 is following that Chocobo series. I'm assuming that it probably didn't sell quite as well, so the next few outings were only exclusive to Japan, and we have a big one here. It was known as Sid Chocobo Fushinaga na Dungeon Toki Wasaru no Miku DS Plus, and I probably got every single word of that wrong, but that is a very long name, and it was released in 2008. It's part of the Chocobo Dungeon series, sort of an enhanced port of the first Chocobo Dungeon, and it released on the DS, and it actually was officially part of the Mystery Dungeon series, which we've actually seen a few games of that come out over here. For instance, the Etrian Mystery Dungeon we got very recently, along with Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. We've got quite a few of those. The Mystery Dungeon games are like a roguelike type game, and it was basically perfect for the Chocobo Dungeon series. Here, number 16 in 2008, about a month or two afterwards, we got Chocobo to Maho no Ihan Majo to Shoujo to Gonin no Yusha. That is, again, probably all completely wrong, and you should just completely berate me in the comments for it. That is called Chocobo Tales, and that is the one that I recently mentioned last video with the subtitle The Witch, the Girl, the 5 Heroes, and it's sort of a mini game adventure hybrid. Again, if you want to see those Chocobo Tales games, you can go ahead and watch that past video I did on them. Next up, May 28th worldwide, we had Chocobo Panic, which was released on the iPad, and that was a party game and some interesting stuff, I guess, if I have to, dig down for interesting things about an iPad game. We had some multi-touch features here, like catch these chocobos, and you had to kind of stop them with your fingers, but essentially it's just a compilation of mini games. Number 18 in this series. Next up, on mobile, we have Chocobo's Crystal Tower, which was released on June 29th of 2010 in Japan, and later on Facebook in November in 2010. Funny enough, I actually just searched to see if this game was still up, and I went to the Facebook page, and the last message on that page was this. It said, "Hi folks, we've taken the game offline for a short bit while we work on it. We'll have Chocobo's Crystal Tower back very soon. Check back here for updates." And that was posted on February 13th of 2012. So if you're looking to play the game, don't hold your breath, basically. Took it down and never put it back up. All right, number 19, this is second to last. We have the Japanese-only Chocobo no Chocoto Nuen, which was a farming simulator released on the Gree mobile platform, which I know absolutely nothing about, seeing as it's Japanese only. And that'll lead us right into our 20th entry in the series. Well, I wish it was our 20th entry. Really, it's one of the more sad announcements, I think, in relation to the whole Chocobo series, and that is Chocobo Racing 3D, which was announced, I believe, in 2012 and then canceled out in 2013. Obviously intended for the 3DS. I think it could have been a fantastic game. They probably could have had a bunch of more tracks, a bunch of different characters, but sadly it just never came to fruition. And pretty much that's the last we've seen of the Chocobo series proper. Personally, I think the series started incredibly strong with the Chocobo Dungeon games, which are still fantastic games to this day. And then after that, it kind of felt like a series with a sort of more experimental sandbox feel, which I guess if you're going to do something like that, the Chocobo series would be the best way of doing it with the wacky humor and everything. Honestly, most of the people in the States don't like this kind of stuff, which is probably why most of them fell to the wayside and we just didn't really get much on them. But there were a few that I would have liked to play that I really wish came out over here, like the DS Mystery Dungeon game of the original Chocobo Dungeon game, that Hataraku Chocobo game. Other than that though, yeah, that's pretty much it. We've officially covered all of the little bits and pieces of Chocobo gaming series, and we can say now properly goodbye to that month of Chocobo that we've been in for this past month. But really, we haven't finished out the real month of Valifor. Next up, we're going to have the one and only Final Fantasy IX, obviously one of my favorites in the franchise and a great game in general. It was billed as the last Final Fantasy game, with very little tiny print underneath it on the PlayStation. So until next time, Crystal Warriors, keep on